G'day everyone. We're excited to be joined today by film and television producer, writer, director Paul Kimball. Paul's a longtime fixture of the UFO and Fortean scene. He's a creative force behind documentaries. Stanton T. Friedman is Real, Fields of Fear, and Best Evidence Top 10 UFO Sightings, as well as paranormal-themed TV shows, including Ghost Cases and Haunted, I think. I don't watch TV too much, but I think that's it. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Greg. And yeah, it's Haunted. I just got back 3 hours ago from the end of production on Haunted season 15.
Wow.
So yeah, from ghosts to talking to you two guys. Awesome.
Nice. The reason we wanted to get Paul on today is because on top of his credentials in 14 genres, he also has a degree in history and politics and plenty of knowledge about the history of fascism. And we feel that this is a topic that 14 feels like ufology, alternative history, conspiracy theories, and so on really need to have a bit of a reckoning with. We're in a moment of history where worldwide fascism and far-right extremism are inexplicably on the march again. And these topics that we enjoy exploring so much are being infiltrated and weaponized to further these ideologies. Now, before a certain segment of people turn off, muttering about us having the woke mind virus or something, I want to be clear about this. This is happening. Ask any historian of fascism in the far right and you'll get the same answer. If people don't see it out there, it's because you are a frog in the slowly boiling water and you haven't realized how hot things have got. Or otherwise, sadly, you might be a little bit fascist yourself. I know people will reject this because whenever we touch on this at the Daily Grail, I get a load of hate email, ranges from straight up death threats to people just being a bit bothered that we're being political. A lot of those people assume my political leaning based on some of that, despite the fact that I am from the deep north of Australia, which is redneck territory, to be honest. It's a bit like the deep south in the US. My family own a cattle farm and ranch. Most of my family and friends are conservative. However, I'm also deeply interested in history and have read plenty about the rise of Nazism and fascism, and so I see where we are heading right now is a dangerous place. In terms of whether the Daily Grail should cover this, not only does this topic impinge on all these 14 topics, as we'll talk about soon, but also we literally have a category on the site devoted to conspiracy, and I think that what's happening also fits into that category well. I'd like this to be less an interview so much as more just a discussion between three guys that have been in the scene for a very long time and also have a little bit of an understanding of fascism. And with Paul's expert input, I think maybe that can even draw out a little bit more. So welcome, Paul. Maybe you can just give us your own take on the current temperature of society and the alternative scene.
Well, and finally, nice to talk to you two in person. Greg, many years, and always a big fan of the Daily Grail. And thank you. Back when I was in the UFO world, you were always posting links to my blogs and stuff, so I really appreciate that. Daily Grail has been and continues to be awesome. Miguel, besides being a wonderful Fortean, you also do great art, which I have commissioned more than a few times and then got my friends to commission. So it's really nice to chat with you guys. I'd prefer that we were talking about, the influence of Brian Wilson's music on my own musical career years ago, or Western society or whatever. Alas, not so much. I would add that I studied fascism, both at the beginning of fascism and at the end. So I wrote my honors thesis in history many years ago on the origins of the Second World War in Europe. And I wrote my major paper in law school on the Nuremberg Trials. So I got, the 1930s, and then I hit it from 1945 to about 1947 or 48. Spoiler, doesn't end well. There's the spoiler for folks that don't know anything about it. But I'm not really in the UFO, actually I'm not in the UFO field at all. I left quite some time ago. As you point out, I still do Fortean related stuff with ghost hunting television shows and stuff. But I, very early on, not as early as I should have, but I came into it. I was making the film you mentioned, Stanton T. Friedman is Real, in 2001, and I sort of got enmeshed in the UFO culture, partly as a filmmaker, but partly Stan was my uncle, so I'd grown up with it. But I hadn't grown up with the culture. I'd grown up with some of the stories, And so, Stan was a natural conduit to me. And I was very interested in a lot of the historical stuff about UFOs and all of that, the mystery. And I remember I was at a conference in 2004, and I think it was 2003 or 2004. And somebody said to me, "Hey, you should be on this radio show." I said, "Yeah, okay. I'm a filmmaker. That's what we do." And so I went on. And it was Linda Moulton Howe doing the interview. So Stan vouched for her. Okay, cool. Not my cup of tea, Miss Moulton Howe, but fine. Veteran researcher. It was a show called The Jeff Rense Show. And yeah, there you go. So I had no idea what the Jeff Rense Show. All I knew was that everybody in ufology had appeared on that show. It wasn't coast to coast, like Coast to Coast was here. The Jeff Rense Show was like a solid, silver or bronze medal level show. And you could reach a lot of people. Okay, that's what I get paid for. I believe, although I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty sure I appeared on it one other time. I don't recall ever speaking to Jeff Rense directly, but one of his other hosts or something. And then I kind of got a little squirrely about it when I went to the website to look at one of the episodes. Like, I generally don't like listening to myself on a podcast or radio show. I kind of went and I said, okay, how did that one go? And I started looking at his website and I was going, I had the right website? This is a neo-Nazi website. Like, doesn't take me long to figure that out. And, from that, I really started to take a look into the connections that the far right, the anti-Semitic movement, the Holocaust denial movement had with ufology. And I'm not somebody who ever cared what people in ufology thought of me, which if you've ever heard me before, it should be obvious to anyone listening. So, the opportunity is, you can just shut up and go along to get along. And I was starting to tell ufologists, people I knew, like, go on the Jeff Rense Show, the guy's an anti-Semite. And when you have David Duke on your website, by the way, I'm legally cool being on the ground and saying Jeff Rense is an anti-Semite. When you put Ernst Zundel, Canada's most notorious Holocaust denier, who we eventually deported, on your website, yeah, you're an anti-Semite. So I was telling these UFO people, like, my bad. I learned a very valuable lesson. Always look, I check every podcast note. Who are these people after that? But I had no idea. And so once you do a dive into the sort of fringe of ufology, which isn't as fringe as we would like it to be, it's a scary, disturbing place. And where far right and Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism would coincide with conspiracy theories. And Zundel's a perfect case. So Zundel was Canada's leading Holocaust denier, and leading Holocaust denier makes it sound like he's, Canada's leading politician and chief justice or something. He was our most notorious Holocaust denier, I guess. And he began by writing UFO zines. Now, Zundel had no interest in ufology, none. No interest in UFO stories, whatever. But he would publish things like Nazi flying saucers, question mark, question mark, question mark. Or it was always a question mark. But and I'm going to make this real short for your listeners, his basic theory was, if you're dumb enough to believe the Nazis survived the Second World War and built flying saucer bases in Antarctica, you're probably dumb enough to believe in Holocaust denial. And so it was a grooming mechanism for him and other Holocaust deniers to try and discover who might be amenable to, hey, Bergen-Belsen, not that bad. Auschwitz, nice summer camp, whatever, that kind of thing. And when you started, and then it's like, that's on the Rense website. Okay, maybe Rense is an anomaly. He's not.
Yeah.
And when you really start to look back throughout the history of ufology, I'm not going to say ufology is racist or anything like that, but there's some very disturbing trends throughout conspiracy culture and ufological culture. And I have to say, fellas, I never, ever thought it would land in the broader culture. It just seemed like, cool, this is a somewhat larger corner of ufology than people would like to admit. Come on, ufology. That's not a harbinger of what's to, oh, yes, it is. Sorry. It is kind of a harbinger of how they operate and where we have landed now. So if you told me 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that this was going to be the culture that we would be living in now, I wouldn't have said you were crazy, but I would have said, I don't think so. And yet, here we are. And so you can actually learn a lot about where we are now. and how they operate. And by they, I mean fascists, and folks, they're fascists. It walks like a fascist, talks like a fascist, and acts like a fascist. It's a fascist. And you can see a little bit of how they operate, how they get people to believe what they want them to believe. Um, Weirdly enough, by looking at how guys like Ernst Sundell, and there are others, got UFO people to believe certain things and then move them to the far right where they might not have been in the far right to begin with.
Yeah, I think they talk about, sorry, Miguel, like, New Age culture has been co-opted. I think, I can't remember the term for it. They called it, pink fascism or something like that, because they're bringing all the New Age people. And along with that, that radicalization process, I think of someone like Peter Thiel, who I've been studying a fair bit lately, and I just keep finding his like kind of tentacles. He's in ufology via Eric Weinstein, and he's in alt history by having dinner with Eric von Däniken and Graham Hancock. And I just wonder how much it's an actual. There might be like a plan to try and pull people through those avenues, and how much it's just that he's already sitting there because he's going that way, and then he's pulling other people that way because he's interested in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Zundel was an idiot, and he was a penny ante kind of guy. There's no such thing as a penny ante Holocaust denier who has a public profile, but he was pretty penny ante. So I don't think he was involved in some grand scheme. He just, and maybe a few others, figured, hey, this might work. But I think it's been, I hate the term metastasized, and I also hate the term weaponized, Jeremy Corbell. But I think they have weaponized it. Not your curiosity, but weaponized something darker inside folks. And I think it has metastasized since then, far beyond anything some idiot like Ernst Sundell would have ever envisioned. Like 20 guys maybe in a cell or something.
Yeah, something that I wanted to point out is it's interesting you start mentioning rents. And one of the news that I linked to the Daily Grail today, June the 12th, is this one from Mother Jones, talking about how a guy by the name of Leland Lerman, who is a guy who used to write for Renz about 9/11 conspiracy theories and also about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is like the grandmother of anti-Semite conspiracies, is now working for RFK Jr. in this Make America Healthy Again initiative. So, like you said, Paul, I mean, it used to be that these idiots just were found in the dark corners of the internet when some people would just go on there and say, ugh! And then you just close the tab and you had to sanitize your laptop. But now these guys couldn't be more mainstream in the United States. I mean, they are going to be there to write policy, which is terrifying.
There was always an undercurrent within ufology, again, as I stressed, of this right wing, far right wing, and then you get into anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and other things. You can see it in David Icke's work. You can see it in Billy Meyer's work. The Plejaren are strangely beautiful Nordic. I mean, if the Nazis were going to create a master race and draw it up, it would probably look like the Plejaren. Not a lot of people of color in the Plejaren, as far as I remember. So those kinds of themes, the Nordic aliens and everything. Wow, what are you doing? And of course, the stand-in for the Jewish people are always reptilian lizards and all those sorts of things, which is Ike's and others sort of school of thought. And that was always there. But ufology, not that I had a lot of respect for ufology, although I had a lot of respect for individual UFO researchers. Mm-hmm. The Kevin Randalls of the world, or my Uncle Stan, or whoever, Dick Hall. I could get down the list of good, decent, honest, center or right wing or left wing people, mostly in the United States. But even if they were right wing, they weren't crazy right wing. These were people who fit within the old Republican Party, if you will. Cool. Mm-hmm. And something broke. Not just ufology. I think something broke our society in general. And I think it was kind of a three-pronged thing. One was the Iraq War, which undermined confidence in traditional Republicans, because that was a Bush thing. One was Barack Obama getting elected president, because having a black man elected president upset a lot of people. And COVID was the nail in the coffin, because legitimate public health measures that were taken to prevent like millions of more people dying, suddenly people were a bit more amenable to thinking this was all part of some grand plan. And, meanwhile, within ufology along that timeline, you could start to see more and more disreputable people showing up and getting invited to conferences as the old guard died or started to retire. Stan sadly passed away, but Kevin Randall's probably in his 80s. Like Dick Hall died, Jim Moseley. I mean, I could go down the list of people who passed away. And in their place came people like John Ventre. John Ventre, in the old days of ufology, at its worst, for folks who don't know, I was state director, I think, of MUFON. And MUFON was infiltrated by all of this too. But as state director in Pennsylvania, I think, of MUFON. I mean, to say the guys on the far right is doing a disservice to the far right. So, guys like Ventre would pop up and suddenly they're acceptable speakers at conferences. And even some of these sort of, I call them the middle-aged, although they're getting a bit older, old-line UFO guard, like Nick Pope, start to evince very, very conservative, far-right Trumpist views when Trump came on the scene. And in some cases, I think that's, and I'm not applying this to Pope, so I'm just saying in general, grifters taking advantage. Hey, money is money, grifters got to grift. So whatever the grift is, we'll do it. And for other people, I think it was a permission slip to act upon who maybe they really were inside. But you're seeing that throughout society in general, and it's insidious and terrifying. And I don't say...
It's kind of shocked me. It's kind of shocked me. I'm a person that kind of has always thought everyone is pretty much inherently good and there's a few bad apples. And the extent especially since the Trump era, I think, began, the extent to which the people I interact with are either A, just really bad people, or two, are very easily corrupted by money and won't stand by their principles is just like shocking to me, which kind of leads me into something as you were talking. How much can we, like you explain those three big things, but how much is it maybe the social media era as well, that all of a sudden this influencer culture, the people with who generate the most outrage or the most sensationalism have suddenly risen to the top. Whereas, in the old days in the Fortean scene, you'd want to be published in Fortean Times or in ufology. You want to be in one of the newsletters, and you might have some bad apples, but you're not going to have this huge amount of people rising to the top. Whereas if I go to Twitter now, like so-called UFO Twitter, it's garbage,
Yeah. So I can see my name, like I'm looking at the screen, folks, Paul Kimball, Red Pill Junkie, but we know who Miguel is, and Greg Taylor. Like, our real names, who we are. We're not hiding. I could call myself Xanadu 741X or whatever, but I'm Paul Kimball, and I've never used a fake name. The old guard ufologists didn't. Stan Friedman, Kevin Randall, Carl Flock, you knew who they were, and you knew where to find them. Now you've got the online culture, quite right. It's one of my biggest bugaboos is people using, like, they're superheroes in the Legion of Superheroes with the Justice League. I'm Lightning Boy, whatever. No, you're Bill sitting in your mom's basement or whoever you are. And you've got a whole bundle of rage in you. And this is giving you the opportunity to get it out without any consequences. And, there are some people who are using pseudonyms, by the way, for legitimate reasons, because they're afraid all the rest of the pseudonym folks are going to come and beat them up or whatever. But to me, not everybody's, I'll say it, not everybody's equal. And by not everybody being equal, I mean not everybody's opinions. Everybody can have one, everybody should have one, and everybody can express them. I truly believe in that, unlike far right. I just don't think everybody's opinions are equal. Like, some are more informed than others, and then there's a whole bunch of others that aren't informed, and yet we're listening more and more to the ones that are not informed because they speak to what we want to hear for whatever reason.
Right.
And so all of this ties into the dumbing down of society, the sort of lack of respect for science, and ufology's played a role in that. Small role, very small role. But everything that sort of, and yeah, not every scientist is right. Not every scientist has been right. There are bad apples in every bunch. But the scientific method is how we're talking right now. It's why I can take blood pressure medication and hopefully not die young. I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, scientists and individual scientists might make mistakes or might even be a bad apple, but the scientific method is what we built our society on. And yet people are seemed inclined, not only inclined, hell-bent to tear that down. And ufology has played a part in creating the distrust of that. And you know what? My Uncle Stan was a little responsible for it too. Things like saying SETI is silly effort to investigate. It's hilarious the first time you hear it. It's kind of catchy. It's cute. And yet there was a better way of saying, look, I just don't agree with SETI's methods. And there's a better way of trying to reach out and contact extraterrestrials if you believe they are out there, whatever. Instead of ridicule, like Stan used ridicule to great effect, and not for ill intent, but the problem is every little bit counts. And
it's still that even like, I don't think at the Daily Grail that we ridicule too much, but I still feel very sensitive about that now. Our whole purpose has been, let's give a voice to some of these, out there ideas and explore them, try and do it sensibly, but, let's try and explore these outside the paradigm ideas which challenge science. And I still believe in that you need to have that voice, but contrarianism now has gone to the point where everyone's just contrarian about everything. There's this whole just rebellion against like scientific authority, like you said. And you just can't do that. Science, like you said, science is a great system that it works 98% of the time. And if you're contrarian about everything, that means you're wrong about a lot of things. You've got to pick and choose and evaluate the evidence on those things.
Like, folks, sorry, Miguel, I'll add one quick thing. Folks are probably sitting and listening and going, that Kimball, what a stick in the mud. He's part of the problem. He's part of them, which I've been accused of being more than once. Look, I ran in a provincial, which would be a state election for Americans, or probably in Australia too, I guess it's states, election in 2017. I ran for the Progressive Conservative Party. I'm a liberal, big L and small l liberal at heart. I ran for the Progressive Conservative Party, which is the center-right party, for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, I have no problem. In fact, I've built my career on alternative kind of things like ghost hunting and UFOs, although I've done documentaries on jazz music and stuff too. But I did an online commercial where it was me dressed up as a ghost hunter, which I was on TV then. And I was hunting the ghosts of the current government that we were fighting against. And then I had cats coming in. Like, look, I'm all for being weird. I'm all for looking at outside the box ideas. Mac Tony's is one of my best friends. The crypto-terrestrial hypothesis is bonkers. He kind of knew it was bonkers, but he thought, hey, there's a cool thought experiment. Let's run it up the flagpole and see what happens. And yet before he passed away, he was as shocked as anyone else that not that people were taking him seriously in the sense of, all right, let's think about this, let's discuss, but in the sense that people went right from that to, this is what it is. And it's like, wait, isn't there supposed to be a discussion between, here's my theory, cool, I accept it. It's cryptos. Yeah, that's what we're going for today. And, he was like, wait, what? I sometimes wonder what Mac would think of what has become, not only of his own theory, but of all of us and of the things that he loved, including ufology, in the years since he passed away in 2009.
Okay, so I just a few things I want to say. First, Stan used to use these catchphrases, the nasty, noisy negativist and all that, which was kind of enduring, good old Uncle Stan. I personally feel that the skeptics, the old-time skeptics, were as negative or even more, negative in their approach, like Philip Glass, James the Amazing Randy. What did Randy call you, Greg? What was the nickname he had for you?
A grubby.
Grubby Greg.
Grubby,
So there's that. And also, I feel this is something that I've been thinking about for quite a while now. That, take, for example, the Condon Report in the 1960s. Like, this is something that the UFO community, especially people like Allen Hynek had been asking for a long time, take an actual university and a group of scientists to take a real serious look to the UFO problem. And this is something that you read Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science journals. He was very, very excited about it. He and Allen went to the University of Colorado. He met Condon. He met some of the people who were going to be in the project. There was this excitement that finally, someone was going to actually tackle this thing the way it needed to be. But obviously, the aftermath was that the Condon report was kind of like doomed from the get-go. Condon really didn't care about UFOs. He said so in an interview, like, I think this is nonsense, but I'm not supposed to reach a conclusion until another 12, 18 months. And then the Condon report arrived, and it said, like, well, there are a few cases we can't really explain, but UFOs shouldn't be a concern for science. The Air Force was saying, "Oh, okay, case closed. Let's just get rid of Project Blue Book," and created this vacuum. This vacuum that obviously was filled with grifters, with sensationalists, a few people that maybe weren't good, well in the head. So I guess what I'm trying to elaborate here is that I cannot understand how we are currently in a situation in which people feel so disenchanted or disenfranchised by the figures of authority. Like, for so many years, they were told by those people, you didn't know what you see. You just saw, Venus reflecting on the clouds coupled with swamp gas. All these cockamamie explanations from some genuine anomalous reports. And that kind of like I feel it's kind of like an absurdity threshold in a culture that builds up like pressure in a pot cooker until eventually it explodes. It explodes, and I think this is the situation in which we're right now. In that now nobody believes in the figures of authority. Nobody believes the true experts. Fauci, the guy who was in charge of the COVID situation in the United States. There are people on the internet who believe that their opinion is more important than his.
I think Hynek or Valet, I can't remember which one, in terms of the Condon report, there's like a quote literally where they say, people aren't stupid to that degree where when you try and fool them with a report, they're going to fill that vacuum with something else. Like, if science can't give them the proper answers, then they're going to fill that. And I think you're spot on there. When Trump was first elected the first time, I thought it was idiotic. If anyone like read all, where he was at, who he was as a person over the past 3 decades, it was just idiotic to actually elect him. But I could understand it the first time, not the second time. The first time I could understand it because a lot of authorities, right across the board, science through to, intelligence agencies, all these things, were treating the public as if they didn't count. And I think there was a certain amount of people started filling that gap with other voices. And a lot of people on social media filled that for them with nonsense and fascist ideas, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. In at least in theory, the historical parallels are not completely accurate. So I don't want to say, hey, there's a direct line between the 1920s and 30s to the 2010s and 20s. But I'll go back to ancient Rome. The empire didn't appear overnight. It appeared over a period of roughly 70 or 80 years. I think ours is going to appear a lot faster because we're in a media age. So everything is accelerated. The Nazis were much faster than the Romans. But the reason that people like Caesar and Pompey and Sulla before them and Marius could arise and undermine the principles of the Republic were because the Republic wasn't working. And the reason why Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy and Franco in Spain, and you can go through the list of fascist dictators, arose was because the democratic systems, it's not that they weren't working very well, and they seemed unfair. And the Depression came, and suddenly you have an entire, much larger group of people who are disenfranchised, and they look at that point for saviors. So that's where we are now. And so you can't just say, hey, Trump, evil. Well, you can, because he is. But you have to try and understand how does a ghoul, like a Reinhard Heydrich looking ghoul like Stephen Miller, get within an inch of power, much less 20 country miles? And hey, Democrats, some of that's on you. And hey, old guard Republicans, some of that's on you. And every single American and the rich, because, I'm not Bernie Sanders' biggest fan, but, he makes a lot of good points, including here's where the wealth is now, and all these people don't have any. And if you look back in Eisenhower's time in the 1950s, there was a real middle class, and there was an opportunity to move from the working class to the middle class, and from the middle class to the upper class. And yeah, there were some super rich people, but they weren't $250 billion super rich. And that kind of social stratification leads to where we are in politics and in society now. Now, in ufology, because I know it's a paranormal podcast or paranormal theme, the same kind of thing, Miguel, you just sort of touched on, existed in a much less important way, but still, if you remove any opportunity for people who are seeing things to report, and that happened in Canada, by the way. You could still make reports, but after the Condon report, like I went through all of the House of Commons records about 15 years ago when I was still blogging on UFOs. So for those of you who said I never did any real research, guess what? Going to archives and looking through that stuff is what real research is. Retweeting what Lou Elizondo just said, that's not real research. Sorry. So from one researcher to a bunch of non-researchers, if those folks are out there. No. So, and you would see parliamentarians in Canada's House of Commons would ask questions in the 1950s, not a lot, but the subject of UFOs would come up. And these were serious people. One of them went on to become the Premier of Manitoba, which is one of our state governors, if you will, and then became the Governor General of Canada, which, because we're technically still part of the empire or whatever, is the Queen or King's representative, our head of state, in essence, or standing in for the Queen. So an important ceremonial role, not a cuckoo. Cabinet ministers would be asking and answering questions about UFOs. And that all ended after the Condon report. So there were the Stephen Michalek case in the late 1960s is a good example. That one was not only asked a lot in the Canadian House of Commons, but investigated by Canadian authorities, the RCMP, the military, allegedly American authorities as well, taken very seriously. So all of that goes away in the early 1970s after the Condon report, because the Condon report gave everybody who didn't want to talk about this anymore an excuse to go, So they transferred it, I think Chris Rutkowski will correct me if I'm wrong, to the National Research Council, put it over there. And yeah, sure, reports would still come in, but you'd never hear questions in the House after that. And so that's, what do people do when they have the ability to, in this case, maybe have their elected representatives take a really, really important case like the Michalek case? Not your average case where somebody says, hey, I saw a light in the sky. But like this case, or maybe Shag Harbor, or in Canada's world. There's always going to be a few really important cases that should at least be investigated. And now you have no outlet, or the outlet that you have is one that really isn't being taken seriously. Well, then you look, Miguel, you're quite right. You look somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And so what can happen too, what I've realized, the skepticism of the 90s and the early 2000s was a very harsh skepticism. Your James Randi was, leading it, your Psychop. And I wrote a lot about Randi and that, and just logically, demolished a lot of his stuff. And a lot of those got really popular. Like I wrote one on James Randi's $1 Million Challenge. It's got close to 1 million views now. But I'm not saying that to say I'm great or anything, but I went after the skeptics logically. And then I was kind of shocked at how many people then were turning to me going, yeah, do it again, do this, do that. there was like this tribalism that happened where the people who felt like these people were their enemy all of a sudden were telling me to keep going after them, when I was just like, I only write this if I see something. It's not a whole market that I'm trying to exploit. I saw that he had done something, so I wrote about it. And I think these days that's really accentuated. You've got especially Alex Jones, who has just made millions off that, just us versus them mentality. But I'm seeing that even in, personalities that I'd expect a little bit more from in the scene, who have realized that if, archaeologists are the enemy, then you just keep saying archaeologists are the enemy. Archaeologists are doing hard work for very little money. And certainly some of the, hierarchy may be a little bit, there may be questions to be asked there, but actually making people an enemy is a very dangerous road to go down, I feel like.
Yeah.
My industry is responsible for that, or at least for a not insignificant part of that. So you speak about archaeologists. Hey, Ancient Aliens, I'm looking at you. One of the most popular television shows, maybe the most popular television show ever made about the UFO phenomenon. And, besides being tremendously dull, basically just repeating the same script over and over, but literally, if there's truth in Ancient Aliens, and there might be, I don't know, but it's all covered up in a big marshmallow cloud of wanting to, poke holes in established orthodoxy. And never actually, they don't even have the guts to do it. They just say, ancient alien theorists or astronaut theorists speculate that. So, and then people hear that, and it's, when you say speculate, it even sounds more scientific to them. Well, they're just speculating. So of course, and it's insidious. It's to me, it's insidious. And it's part of I'm sure they didn't take a piece from Ert Zundel's playbook, but it is kind of, that's the playbook that the far right uses. Hey, we're just throwing this out there. See how many people pay attention to it. Oh, nobody. Okay. Chuck that one. That one. Okay, now let's run with that. And, that's why when I would do a ghost hunting show, which we're still doing, but I would always be like, look, we're not going to tell you what to believe. These are our experiences. You can go to this place and see if you have an experience. Hey, James Randi, come do your own $1 million challenge at, the Demon House in Yarmouth or whatever. Like, I'm not going to tell you what's there. I'm just going to tell you what we experienced. And you can make of that what you want. But you can go do it too. So, but there's always an understanding that, entertainment, the entertainment industry corrupts to a great deal because they're not necessary. I'm not going to say not necessarily. They're usually not interested in facts or even the truth. They're interested in ratings and money, and that's fine. As long as you understand that, no problem. The problem is when you elect a reality television show host as your president, people's understanding of the lines between, like the 6-time bankrupt guy, and suddenly The Apprentice turns him into the business mogul Scrooge McDuck of the century. No, the guy's an utter failure at every business level, but television turned him into a success story. Crazy. And yet, there you go. So when you mentioned the 90s, I think it was you, Greg, the skepticism got pretty rabid in the 90s. And some of them, there were guys like Carl Flock, who was a friend of mine. Carl could be very skeptical, although he also believed aliens had visited Earth at least a couple times. But especially on cattle mutilations, which I agreed with him on, having done a film on it. He went and said, look, no, this has been investigated. Here's the answers. You can believe it or not. I think some of that was a reaction to what was happening in the early 1980s, late 70s, and into the 1980s with Roswell and then Majestic 12. Maybe if it had just been Roswell, but once it started to go into MJ12, government conspiracies, and all of that came in, which my uncle was somewhat responsible for, but people went far beyond what he ever envisioned about that. And I think that's what happens. The one side breeds a reaction from the other side. And what is it Greg Bishop calls it? The excluded middle. One of my favorite terms in paranormal, and just in life, the excluded middle. Nixon called it the silent majority. I like excluded middle better. Get lost in the shuffle, and then you're kind of left with sort of Hobbesian choices. Either nobody's talking to us, or I have to pick a side. And I think a lot of us, this is one of the reasons why I just walked away from ufology. I was in the excluded middle, and I went, I'm not picking a side. I'm out. Peace out. I think some people picked a side that way. I think some others maybe went more towards the skeptical side. And I don't really see much of a middle ground anymore. There are sensible guys out there. Ryan Sprague, who works on our Ghost Show, is one of them. There are people that I recognize the spirit of Mac Tony's in, but they are far fewer than they were 15 years ago, for sure.
I actually feel that the skeptic movement became more vicious after 9/11. After 2001, there was this notion that the skeptic movement went on a crusade against all, not only woo-woo ideas like, I don't know, psychic stuff, mind reading, whatever, but also against religion itself.
Well, I kind of joined with the new atheists. Like there was that
Mhm.
merging.
Yeah,
of
there
those
was
movements.
this merge, this super merger, and there was all these people who started to mix the anti woo stuff with the anti-religious stuff, which sometimes turned kind of racist because the anti-religion turned into anti-Muslim. Uh, and it's funny because all these people thought that when people stopped going to church or stopped being subscribed to some institutionalized religion, they will turn into materialist atheists, rationalists, and then the world will turn into atheist paradise. But guess what? The kids nowadays, yeah, they don't go to church. But that doesn't mean that they're reading, books by atheists. They are doing astrology. They are doing spells. They are reading Crowley instead of reading, I don't know, Darwin. It's I don't know if that is part of this crumbling of the trust in institutions, science being one of them, and now people trying to find their own, I don't know, ideas, beliefs elsewhere on their own.
Yeah, I don't know. You see a guy like John Greenwald, who I knew when he was very, very young. Interviewed him back in 2001, I think. Like he was a teenager. He's a puppy. He's just a little boy. And, kudos to him. He's built a very, not just in ufology, but in media and other areas. He's a good career. I always knew he's smart. But you see he'll post stuff. And if it's even remotely, I'm going to use the term pro extraterrestrial hypothesis, okay, cool. People are cool. He posts anything that might be even remotely critical of the current ufological Lou Elizondo,
Oh yeah,
group. Boom, like a rain of hellfire down on John's head,
yeah.
and that's part of it too. Like it's become so. If you're not speaking, if you're not catering to them, I see it with Ryan Sprague. Any of the. I can only imagine what people would say. Like Stan used to every now and then calm people down when they were getting too antsy. And it was like the John McCain moment when he said to the lady in the audience, no, Barack Obama's not a Muslim. He's a good, loyal American. We just have a difference of opinion. We need more of that. Even if I don't agree with John McCain, we need guys who would do that. They're gone.
Yeah.
And they're gone in ufology too. Some of
maybe I'm
a
the
coward.
Overton window. Yeah, you've got the Overton window has shifted because I just turned on my computer the other morning and saw that Trump had put out this thing, and he's calling Gavin Newsom, who I'm not a huge fan of, but he's calling him Gavin Newscum. Like, people don't understand that, like, 20 years ago, Howard Dean was basically ejected from a presidential race because he screamed a bit loud.
Yeehaw. Yeah.
And now you've got a president calling a governor new scum. Like, I just don't even understand how we got to that point of people accepting that as, to me, if a politician does something like that, if a politician race baits or anything like that, that's it. They are not getting my support ever if it gets to that level. And I don't understand how people accept that anymore.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
I think we started to confuse or to conflate politics with the entertainment business. And we now demanded all politicians to be entertainers. That there was a time when politicians were the boring people who make decisions, where people then went to see Frank Sinatra or Nat King Cole or whatever. But now we think that celebrities, have an opinion that should be important to determine policy. To the point that, like you said, Paul, United States elected a minor reality TV show celebrity to the biggest office in the world. And I think that is part of the problem. I think the part of the problem is that when we decided that we wanted our news to be entertaining, our politics to be entertaining, even our science to be entertaining, that's when we started to destabilize things beyond a salvageable point.
Yeah, you know who's entertaining? Stephen Greer is entertaining. I know. I've interviewed the man. He's very charming, or at least he used to be. Last time I saw him, like 20 years ago, he's very charming and polite. And to see him speak, Greer was a very entertaining speaker, and he was very captivating. As far as ufology goes, it's not like he was Winston Churchill, but within the confines of ufology, he was, Stan Friedman level of, he could hold an audience, and he could talk because he's educated and intelligent. He could talk and make it seem like it makes sense, until you do a dive into what he's talking about. Like I briefed the CIA director. No, you didn't. You had dinner with him. I don't even know how that happened. But that's not a briefing. Everybody at that dinner just said, yeah, it was just a dinner, et cetera, et cetera. And you start to break down what they're doing. But, Greg, you touched on a very, to me, for anybody listening, a super important point, the most important point you can make. Gavin Newsom. And when and Trump is the master at this. This is, Jeb Bush, low energy Jeb, whatever. He finds crooked Hillary, that kind of thing. But when you start dehumanizing people, which is a very effective tool in the hands of somebody who can wield it effectively, like Trump can, that opens the floodgates and the doors to every horrible thing human history has ever given us. So Rwanda, cockroaches. That's what the radio, they're cockroaches. You can go back to the Nazis. They also used the term cockroaches to refer to Jews. But they would dehumanize the Roma. They would dehumanize Slavs. They would dehumanize gays. And they would use those slurs to do it. And it doesn't happen overnight, but slowly. But if you just keep repeating it, suddenly it's a lot easier, maybe, for somebody to take a shot at Gavin Newsom because he's a Gavin Newscum. He's a scum. And you see that in ufology. So you guys, Greg, you've been on the receiving end of it. Miguel, I don't know how much you have. I was.
Yes. Yes,
there you go. So circling back to Jeff Rentz, I started a blog. It was 2005 after I clued into Rentz. And I called it the Rentz Watch. And I went, here you go. I'm going to tell you why this guy's an anti-Semite, neo-Nazi. Bing, 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 bing. Post after post after post after post. And I'm going to put it in historical context. And even on my old The Other Side of Truth blog, I started doing more posts about anti-Semitism within ufology, some of the imagery that was being used, and the torrent of abuse that, hey, my wife now, my fiance at the time, I would show some, and then she said, don't ever show me this again. People threatening you and stuff. And then they start calling you, trying to dehumanize you. I didn't say Jeff Rentz was a cockroach. I just said, he's a Holocaust denier. I can prove it. Literally, it's on his website. It's not open to debate. I'm just pointing it out. Mm-hmm. But now you see that, and Greg, you're quite right with social media. Everybody's free to do it under a pseudonym. So Greenwald gets it. Ryan Sprague has gotten it, I know. I'm not in contact with a lot of the UFO crowd anymore, but I can see the comments on their Twitter feed, or X, whatever it's called. And I refuse to call it X, it's Twitter. And long live the Twitter Republic. Hopefully the rebellion reclaims it someday. Luke Skywalker of Twitter is needed. And you just, that did not happen. In the old days, we had something called UFO Updates, which was a private, you had to join and be approved by Earl Bruce Knapp, the moderator. It's pretty easy to get approved, as long as you weren't a neo-Nazi. You were probably going to get approved. But you get bounced if you started getting out of line. And yeah, the discussions between people online could be very contentious. Jerry Clark, the UFO researcher, and I used to go at it all the time over intelligent design and a whole bunch of stuff. And then we'd talk and we'd say, well, we agree on this. But I never said Jerry Cockroach, and he never said Paul Kimball is scum and, unhuman or whatever. And yet you're starting to see that. And the first time I ever came across that was at the Aztec UFO conference. I'll tell you a little story. It's a very short story because I do tend to go on. And I was walking out of the conference one night where I was showing my film, Aztec 1948, with my brother. And these two people dressed in black came up to me. Sounds like I'm going to have a Men in Black story, but I don't. And they started trying to tell me something George Green, and it was a cool anti-Semitic lizard people conspiracy theories. Fine. And I said, no, look, sorry. My brother was, trying to drag me away. And I was trying to be polite because I'm Canadian. But finally I'd had enough. And I said, no, you're crazy. Sorry. And they went, you're one of them. And I went, who the heck is them? And then I said, and they wrote my name down because it was on the speaker tag. And they said, you're one of them. And I said, one of them? Yeah, like Nick Redfern. And I said, Nick Redfern is one of them? What? And they said, yes. And I said, you know what? I just have to ask you, why is Nick Redfern one of them? Like, I get maybe now why you think I am, but why is Nick? And they said, because he's always dressed in black. And I went, what? You're insane. He's dressed in black because he's a punk. Like, Morrissey, black is what I wear on the outside because black is how I feel on the inside. I mean, come on. Did you guys miss the 80s? But they were like, they had a book. So I go up to Carl Flock afterwards. It was kind of disturbing. They were vaguely threatening. I said, geez, Carl, here's what happened. And Carl said, oh, you're in the book now. And I went, the book? And I think it was Bruce McAdie walked over and said, oh, he's in the book? And it was like getting read into the Illuminati or something. It's like, what am I into? They said, we're all in it. Stan's in it, Kevin Randall's in it, Nick's in it. I'm like, oh. He said, yeah, there's this small little crazy group of people who show up at these conferences. And that's what they do. And you were them. You were part of this cabal that was trying to destroy the human race or whatever. And I thought, these people are absolutely bat, poo, bonkers, crazy, insane. Yeah. And they have proliferated now. And on the internet, on X or Twitter, that is what I see in ufology more than anything else.
The whole idea of I want to hit 2 points there. First, just on the free speech thing, it's a big thing these days. You can't be banned from Twitter. You need free speech or whatever, which is a misunderstanding of what free speech is, which is that the government can't shut down your speech. But that whole thing of now huge social media companies. See, when the Daily Grail was running and we had comments before social media hit and no one comments on the site anymore, when people used to comment and just there were discussions, the rule was you could attack the idea, but not the person.
Yeah, there was this idea that ideas were not sacred. You could go mercilessly against someone's, beholden belief. And there were a few people who were, kind of like in the right fringe, but not completely like neo-Nazi on the Daily Grail, but I guess eventually they got tired of the other members just, mercilessly, hitting them with sound arguments, you guys are insane. You look at history books. Nothing, like you said, is backed by facts. And that's how things were back then,
The whole idea was like, if you attacked personally, you're out. I would just ban people and they'd turn back up under another username sometimes, but they'd do the same thing. They'd get kicked again. This idea that you can go into someone's house and just abuse people is wrong. Like, that's not free speech. That's abusing someone in their house, and you should be able to be banned. I think social media, because they're so big now, you can't do that at scale properly. I've had death threats on Twitter and I've reported it and they go, oh, we can't see anything wrong with this. I'm like, that's just because it's a bot doing everything, so you just can't do it at scale. I just wanted to return to the other thing you're talking about, these guys turning up and putting you in the book. There's a book, Jason Stanley's How Fascism Work, I think it's called. And one of the pillars he talks about, and this applies to what we're talking about today, is that one of the pillars of fascism is creating unreality and just promoting, basically breaking reality so that people can't understand anymore what is reality and what is not. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how the genres that we like might contribute to that.
Hmm.
You know, I never worried about that, like, because back in the day of Jeff Rents and the Rents Watch and whatever, I wasn't worried about a Nazi resurgence in the United States or anywhere else. I mean, I just wasn't.
It just seems so far
Uh,
fetched.
yeah, it was like Francis Fukuyama. You know, it's the end of history at the end of the Cold War, and now liberal democracy, because it is clearly the best system with its flaws, but now has triumphed. We beat fascism. Now we beat communism. We will reign supreme, and a golden age will come. Oops. So I have struggled more with it lately. Uh, and in my own weird, small little way, my own role in doing it. And I can say, you know, doing a ghost show, for instance, that I have tried, and there's, you know, we don't do like ghost hunters or whatever. We It's very personal and it's a personal journey. And we could be hunting kangaroos, Greg, like I suppose, but and we don't say hunting, we say investigating. And I say all that, and you know, I still struggle sometimes with, are we dumbing things down?
Hmm.
Like, are we contributing to people maybe believing in something that isn't real? Then I go, well, hold on now. I'm a happy agnostic. I think we all should be. Certainty is the death of reason in my mind. And I say, yeah, I have never once said that I believe it's a demon or Satan or it's Uncle Ed or Aunt Ethel. I've said, I think something weird just happened. I'm not sure I can explain this. It could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this. And here, you know, I've always tried to keep my own thoughts out of the show. And I think most of the cast members have as well. So that's what I've tried to do. And that's the line that I've tried to draw. Um, but I left the Ghost Show last year, partly because I'd done it for 13 seasons, but partly I turned it over to other people, my old ghost hunting partner, Holly, and other folks who were doing the show. And created a new show where it's much more about the history. We always tried to lean into the history too. Like the haunted locations had a history to them. People had their stories. So let's do what Ryan Sprague does. And Ryan's now in the Ghost Show, you know, where he says, these are the stories from the UFO witnesses. And I'll put witnesses in quotation marks, just to satisfy the skeptics, but people who've seen something. These are their stories. You can make of them what you want. This could be science, if you think it's science. It could be folklore, which is generally where I land. But these are stories, and if you have enough of these stories, it matters. There's something there that's worth maybe not Congress looking into, or the National Institute of Science or whatever, but maybe researching and looking into is not a bad thing. But I've always been very clear. It's a very fine line. Like I used to say when I put out best evidence, top 10 UFO cases. Yeah, science, maybe there's a role for it. I don't want them to stop researching this cure for cancer to go look into the UFO phenomenon. Get a cure for cancer first. Well, aliens will give it to us. Shut up. That's how the conversation would go.
That's AI now.
Yeah, but in the ghost hunting world, you're quite right, Greg. I have struggled with it. I look back in some of my UFO work, and I always gave equal play to everybody. Skeptics like Carl Flock, maybe believers like Stanton Friedman, and maybe some people in the middle like Dick Hall. And nobody. The thing I suppose what I lean on is nobody in any of my films ever complained about how I portrayed them. I didn't misrepresent their views. I said, here is, and Stan in the film I made about my own uncle, his own biopic, gets criticized by Carl Flock and Kevin Randall pretty mercilessly in the last third of the film. And that's part of it too. And then to the viewers, I just trust that you're smart enough to be able to make your own mind up and see what's right and what's wrong. The problem is, I'm not sure I have that trust anymore in the people out there, because it gets back to what we've been talking about. I want to believe that there's that excluded middle that Greg talks about, and the majority of people are decent, good, honest people who are searching for the truth, whatever it is. I just think it's like we're on the edge, and I don't want to be part of that, personally, anymore.
Perhaps it's like allergies. Bear with me here. Like, I don't know if you have heard this theory that if a child is not exposed to contaminants, like is not allowed to play in the dirt, like to get hosed and to like jump in the puddle, then when it when the child grows older, it will be more susceptible to catch allergies. Why? Because his her immune system would not have been exposed to all these threats, and they would not have been able to to learn when these threats are maybe not important and when they are really, something to worry about. And that's why, analogy is basically your immune system overreacting and say, oh my god, this is really very dangerous. So maybe it's the same with the weird stuff, the Fortean stuff. Like, I want to think that because I was reading about ghosts and UFOs and the Loch Ness monster when I was a child, but then later I turned into an adult, and now I feel, when it comes to my family, I'm almost like the most skeptic one. Like my family members are always sharing all these crazy woo-woo stories on WhatsApp, on our WhatsApp groups, and say, well, this story is not true because of this, of this, of this. This photo is AI. This video is fake. I feel that because I was exposed as a younger person to the woo stuff, and then I learned, through trials and tribulations, that, oh, Billy Meyer was a hoax, and all this, the surgeon photo of the Loch Ness monster was also a hoax. You go on and start to build your Fortean immune system, as it were, and then you become a more sensible, more reasonable adult. Hopefully, I feel that maybe in that regard, if we were to, like, tomorrow, someone listen to this and say, Paul, I'm going to shut your program because it's a danger to the public, this exposure of these crazy ideas that destabilize society, I feel that would be even worse. I feel that you need to, like, expose people to a little bit of the woo so they can build their let's say, instead of their immune system, their BS system, to try to learn the shit from the shinola, as Terence McKenna used to say.
There has to be some, like, critical thinking skills that go along with that, though, as well. Like, lots of people they get right into religion or something, and they just keep that religion for life without testing, doing any testing on that. I'm happy for people to have their religion, but I just mean in terms of there has to be a way that we teach people critical thinking skills and to just sit in a place of doubt happily. I think, Paul was just talking about that, not believing too much. And funnily enough, I think part of the solution to that fascist pillar of unreality is to actually not believe too much in reality.
Right.
Because with the fascism, they get you into that state of unreality, and then they give you something to grab hold of, and all of a sudden it's a bad thing that you're holding on to. Mm-hmm. And I think if you can have that Robert Anton Wilson kind of attitude of just happily sitting in, a space where you can happily believe something without being, as he said, I have a lot of suspicions rather than beliefs. You just sit in that zone where you're not too attached to an idea that if someone attacks it, then you then get really angry. And so you just need to, if you sit in that place of doubt, I think that gets rid of, well, happily in that place of doubt, then they can get rid of that tendency in fascism to grab hold of people and say, here's this bit of reality that you can hold on to, and turns them into a foot soldier for fascism.
Yeah, I mean, like I'll get off the ghost thing in just a sec, but in the ghost hunting world, like Holly Stevens, until I retired last year, was my ghost hunting partner. Lots of other hosts and stuff, but she and I go all the way back to ghost cases. And I would always say to her lovingly, hey, Holly, there's no such thing as ghost science, because she has a science background. She's a degree in biology. And she would try and bring, and she did bring, a more scientific kind of mindset to it. And in my second last season, which was, I think, 12, she said, oh my God, Paul, you're conducting a double-blind science experiment here. And I went, I'm a what now? And she said, you're doing ghost science. And I went, cool. All right, finally. It only took me 12 seasons to get there. But, that's why I struggle with it, but I don't worry about it too much, because to me, I go back and we never tell people what to believe. So you mentioned religion, Greg. My grandfather was a Reformed Baptist minister, never tried to convert me or tell me what to believe. He did him. And, I'm sure he would have been quite happy if I'd become an evangelical believer. Yay. But get to it on your own. Never tried to convert my dad, as far as I know, that kind of thing. I think religion's great as long as you're using it as a tool for self-examination and explore your own path. And maybe find a few like-minded people and maybe you explore the path together. Cool. That's what churches should be. Where I have a problem is when, the Southern Baptist Conference says, hey, you know what? We're against gay marriage. And then adopt it as a political stance. And you start, hey, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and render unto God what is God's. And that's, hey, pretty good advice. Thanks, Bible. And you know what? That's where the sort of rubber hits the road, because you used it, the shit hits the shinola, whatever. Like, that's the breaking point for me. And the problem is the breaking point used to be over here. You'd have crazy Ernst Zundel and a few people, but it was never a danger. They were never big. There wasn't a real threat. And then along come guys like Stephen Bassett, Stephen Greer, Daniel Sheehan, and that whole disclosure crowd. Like, now it's a political thing, the truth embargo, even Stan with the cosmic water. But these guys were far worse, far worse. And then you'd think, well, that's as bad as it's going to get, right? Oh, no, hold on there. Then you get Jeremy Corbell. We're going to weaponize your curiosity. And George Knapp, who used to be the serious one on Coast to Coast. And, Ross Coulthart, who, you're from Australia, Greg. You know more than Americans know about Ross Coulthart.
He used to be on 60 Minutes, and now
I know. Yeah, and if you look into Ross Coulthart and what he was into, and some of the things he did when he was in PR and stuff, it's like, wait, hold on. And you see, these guys are taking what Bassett and Greer, those guys were doing, and they just shined it up a little bit, made it maybe sound. The accent helps for Coulthart, but they sound maybe a little not as crazy as Greer does, or even Bassett. Sound a little more respectable. Lou Elizondo, well, he was in the military. The irony is all these people lining up to support military people after 40 years of saying the military is the problem. And now our best people are military people from the intelligence community. Somewhere, Rick Doty is sitting back going, where was this in the 1980s? I could have made a mint. And instead, all I had was Paul Benowitz. And now these people are making bank. Come on. So, it's kind of like early Nazism. That's right. I just compared some of you to Nazis. Early Nazism in the 1920s, have a coup, miserable failure, go spend a few months in jail. Ooh, that's not a good way to do it. We need to put a shirt and tie on. Get rid of the brown shirts. Talk to big business. Shine this Nazi thing up a bit. Run in elections. That worked. And then once you get in, well, we don't have all the power yet. Hindenburg's still there. He's going to die soon, but we got to do a few things. You know what? The SA is more trouble than they're worth right now. Well, let's just shoot all the leaders and get the army to back us. Check. And even within ufology, like, that's how they do it. They start out crazy and then they shine it up. And you can see that on the disclosure movement within ufology. And sorry, I just compared them to Nazis, but because they're not. Don't think.
Yeah.
But some of them probably are. The track that they take, though, you can learn from ufology how these people work. And they shine up the turd and then represent it a couple of years later as, hello, I'm Ross Coulthart on Newsmax, and today I know where there's a secret Astrodome-sized UFO, but I can't tell you, or whatever he was on about. Like, at that point, you just stop listening to them. If they say they have the truth but won't tell you because, and Corbell does that all the time too. It's madness. Like, it's just madness, and yet there they are.
It's pretty amazing that I keep thinking about the conspiracy movement and where they are at the moment. And there are just some of the greatest conspiracy theories you could get into right now if you weren't a Trump backer. But like 90% of the conspiracy movement is heavily right, if not far right these days. And so they have to ignore all this stuff like, the Peter Thiel tech-fascism that's coming through. And, what was it? Alex Jones the other day was talking about Palantir and just trying to tell everyone to settle down a bit about Palantir. Like, Palantir is like
the guy who
20
went
years
to
ago
Bohemian
would have just been
Grove.
the greatest thing for him. It's basically the total information awareness project that he railed about and all of us railed about 20 years ago. When it got shut down because of all the public outcry, Palantir was literally recruited to take over that role. And now they are finally achieving that total information awareness. And Alex Jones is having to sit there and go, settle down, people. It's not too bad.
Why do people know about Palantir and nothing else? Well, that's because it comes from the left, only focusing on Palantir. because it's seen as something being brought in to surveil the government itself and to try to find ways fraud abuse. That's what Trump wants it for.
Here, like I share with people, Greg, your writings on Peter Thiel. It's tough to pick one, but Peter Thiel is probably the greatest threat to democracy, liberal democracy, Western society, just planet Earth, that's out there right now. And it's not a name that most people know about if you're not really into it. And I sort of call them the tech fascist broskies, who basically want to turn us all into tech serfs. And, it's like, hey, read Greg Taylor's article on Peter Thiel and then go watch THX 1138 by George Lucas. And guess what? You're there. Like, that's the destination they envisioned for us, or 1984, whatever. And so, but those people are Ernst Zundel with a lot more money. Like, Zundel was impoverished, so that just goes without saying. I have more money than Ernst Zundel had. But those are like Ernst Zundel on super steroids with billions of dollars and a social media ecosystem where they can get that message out in a way he never could. And they also carry the imprimatur of, if not the state, at least contracts with the state and contacts with the state, and the ability through, including the mainstream media, to influence thought in a way we've never seen in human history. The Gutenberg Bible and the printing press doesn't even begin to cover it. That was penny ante to what they can do now. And, Thiel's not the only one. There are others. Musk is probably too crazy to be part of it. I think he's insane. But Thiel is not. And these people are dangerous.
He's a chess player, Thiel. Yeah. And I feel he's very litigious, Peter Thiel. But I think you can comfortably say he is on the fascist spectrum, at least, considering he has literally written, he doesn't believe in democracy anymore. And the guy he follows, Curtis Yarvin, said it's time for America to get over their dictatorphobia. So, and like you said, Elon Musk, I don't know where he sits exactly, but in terms of where he has sat for the last couple of years, which is a whole bunch of ideologies that are not real great, from the Test-Grill bundle, like long-termism and that, through to very fascistic ideas. He controls X/Twitter. Like, he has this massive thing. And if you go to Twitter and have a look at just the suggested feed, it's just radicalization central. He is literally just pumping propaganda down people's throats. If I go to Joe Rogan's show and look at the guest list for the past year, it's like state media. Literally, it has so many members who are from people who are actually politicians, your J.D. Vances, etc., through to, like, he had all these health influencers last year who are now part of RFK Jr.'s Maha movement. Like, the guest list, I would imagine, is probably about 40% state media over the past year. And again, that's another pillar of fascism, is propaganda, is having these propaganda outlets. And I'm not sure where we go when the biggest Facebook is the biggest news source for most Americans these days. Like, polls have shown that people mostly get their news from Facebook, Zuckerberg, Twitter, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan. These are all now basically state media and a state that is pretty much fascist. So I'm not sure how we can turn things around from here.
America's the problem. Like, hey, Canada's new prime minister, we're going to lead the world, or help lead the world now. Cool. I like him. I voted for him, and I'm backing that. Let's join the EU or whatever. But no, America it's like Superman. The Justice League goes down if Superman goes down. If Superman breaks bad stuff happens on Earth. And the United States is Superman. I don't care whether people like it or not. They are in the liberal democratic order. So something has to be done to save them from themselves. And I know a lot of good people in the United States. I have relatives in the United States and friends. They're not all fascists. But then again, that's what Germans said after the war. Hey, we weren't fascists. And many of them weren't. Some just went along to get along. Others actively, fewer, resisted. The time for resistance is now. Mm-hmm. The time for resistance is not 2026, when there won't be free and fair midterms. People say, in the midterms, Trump's going to get crushed. Does this sound like a guy who's actually going to allow free and fair elections in 2026? And
do you think the tech billionaires are going to allow free and fair elections when their ass is on the line if Democrats ever get back in, with regulation, with possible prison for some of the things Musk has done?
Yeah, no, and they have their guy, and their guy's not Trump. It's Vance. Vance is far more dangerous than Trump. because Trump just cares about money. And he's a disreputable guy, but I could probably have a beer with the man, I suppose, like if I had to, gun to my head. Vance? No. Vance is different. And the guys behind him, like Trump, you've got to go, sooner or later, you're going to go, heart attack, whatever. And then you've got President Vance. And that's the problem. And
he's scary.
So,
he has like this super alignment. Like, again, I've been looking into all this quite a bit with the tech fascism and that. He's this super alignment of A, the tech fascists, and B, the religious / Russ Vought radicals who just want to go back to Handmaid's Tale shit. Like, and people kind of underestimate Vance a little bit because he lacks a personality, which he does. And the whole couch thing, that joke. And so people just write him off as a joke. If you listen to him speak, he is super slick at just like being your friend and coming across as rational and calm and reasonable. And he has some of the most radical, scary ideas.
Yes, which he probably would happily jettison if the zeitgeist. I don't think he has a moral center,
right?
Or at least
he used to be anti-Trump.
Power, but he's dangerous. He's smart. He's reasonably well spoken, and he's young. Like,
and he's Peter Thiel's puppet as well.
And he's
let's be clear. Peter Thiel has funded his entire career for the last 15 years.
Installed by Donald Trump on Donald Trump Jr.'s recommendation, and a few others too. And so it's all a big grift. Like, there's the other thing. You want similarities. Ufology oftentimes can seem like a grift. Not always, but oftentimes. Well, that's what politics in the United States is now. It's gone beyond corruption. You've talked about Warren Harding's administration, or the corruption in the Ulysses S. Grant's administration. Not Grant himself, but people within his administration. Yeah, it's penny ante compared to what Trump. I mean, they have. Corbell's onto something. Everything's been weaponized. Like, fine, except your curiosity. So there's the great irony. I mean, don't follow leaders, don't follow parking meters, or whatever Dylan said. Like, where is that spirit? But people have stopped questioning because I think they want easy answers too. And it's easily digestible stuff. So it's trite and it's easy to say. I know you two guys probably agree with me, but the easiest, what everybody has to do is just stop, take a breath, and start doing some thinking, some critical thinking about everything, including UFOs. Hey, second guess the extraterrestrial hypothesis if that's what you've held on to for 40 years. Hey, you don't believe in space aliens? Second guess that too, because science now tells us that there's almost certainly life out there. And while it may or may not be coming here, you shouldn't rule it out. And so, like, just start to get back into that excluded middle. And I just wish we had more people who would say, we don't know, but we want to find out.
Bit of humility. And we all need a bit more humility and just basically looking out for each other. I think everyone just wants to force their view on other people, and maybe we should all just listen a little bit more.
Yeah, but as we're recording this, there's a U.S. senator we're talking about this before we came on, who, yes, it was a bit of performance art on his part. He showed up, but he immediately identifies himself as California Senator Alex Padilla, and he's immediately escorted out and then taken to the ground and handcuffed. Hey, guys, fascism is here. Like, that's what it looks like. And that's just the beginning. And so when you see stuff like that, I get people, friends in the United States, who say, you know what? Peaceful protest is great. Time has passed. And I go, no, violence. Well, your country was born out of violent revolution, so maybe at some point, I'm not sure we're there yet, try a general strike first. It worked to get de Gaulle out of power in the late 1960s. They shut France down and, okay, I quit. There are things you can do before you get to violence. But you need to get your own house in order if you're the opposition, if you're the Democrats. I'm not a Gavin Newsom fan, but if he's going to be one of the guys, he's become pretty effective at offering a counter narrative to Trump's crazy narrative. And both of them are playing performance politics. And
there has to be that counter narrative of getting back to some sort of normality, though. And I think we're just talking about tools for how to, get out of this moment a bit. One thing that has always worked for me is it's like the what if the other side did this test. So if Barack Obama sent troops into DFW, what would be, if I was a right-wing person, if I think about that, I'd go, actually, I'm not probably I'm not down with this. I don't think Barack Obama should be sending troops into DFW to put down protests. So I think that's a handy thing to always just put the shoe on the other foot, try and think from that other person's perspective, and that interrogates your own views and goes, hold on, am I just putting my own biases on this? It helps you get out of that a little bit, I think.
Yeah, as long as you always remember, you can't do deals with fascists. The German conservatives found that out the hard way. American conservatives are finding that out. They should have learned by now. Like Rand Paul the other day saying, or today I think saying, I'm disappointed in Trump and I've lost a lot of respect for him because he didn't invite me to the garden party. Really? The 34 felony convictions, the civil claim judgment against you for sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll. I mean, I can go down the long list. None of those things made you lose respect for him, but he didn't invite you to a garden party. Hey, whatever gets you there, brother, whatever gets you to the place you need to be.
The face-eating leopards are starting to eat faces.
I know, but you can't do deals with them. And in ufology, because I always like to steer it back to the paranormal briefly, there are people you can disagree with and have constructive conversations and all that. But there are people and radicals, the hard superline skeptics, I'll start with them. You can't deal with them. And they're probably fewer than we think they are. And you cannot deal with people who support frauds, liars, grifters, and hucksters. You can't. They should be like, if people want to follow them, cool. But you shouldn't. And I could name them all, but I don't want to get Greg sued. But, I'll just give you one. Bob freaking Lazar. I'm sorry. If you're on the Bob Lazar train and you're a promoter of it, if you're believing in it, maybe you can be saved. But if you're one of the people pushing it and continually promoting it and you know who you are, you're lost. You're the problem, not even close to the solution. And there's plenty of other examples, but Lazar's the one that, because of Stan and his work debunking him repeatedly, and then seeing video, I wasn't there, but seeing Corbell completely disrespect Stan on stage when he at a conference when he was trying to explain that to Corbell, and Corbell's like, "Wow, you're an old man, go away," or whatever. How are you not listening to this? He didn't go to MIT, and on and on and on. Oh, well, the government covered up. You're lost. You're lost. And anybody who's pushing that narrative is dangerous to anyone who's looking for a real search for the truth and are sowing the seeds in their own small little way for fascism and anti-science and everything that is plaguing us today. They're responsible for it as much as Trump and Republicans and anyone else. And, I'll go to my grave saying that and speaking it and believing it. I don't care what people think of me. You're part of the problem. And it's a much bigger problem now than it was 20 years ago. And that's on you.
Speaking about parallels between, the fascism that happened in the 20th century and the fascism that is rising now, I felt it was kind of uncanny, the parallel between how prior to the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany and the fascists in Italy, there was a global epidemic of Spanish flu in the 1920s. How that almost happened up to a T with COVID, almost 100 years later. I know history tends to repeat itself, but come on now. that felt kind of weird, how there was.
There's a bunch of parallels like that. There's the futurist, basically Mussolini, part of the thing that informed his ideology was a futurist manifesto. And all of a sudden we have Mark Andreessen doing a futurist manifesto. There's all these echoes of 100 years ago. But Paul's probably better suited to talk about that.
Yeah, unfortunately. You go into the fascist pool and it's you just have to sweep it off sometimes. There are uncanny parallels. There's radical differences too. The old phrase, the Nazis came in brown shirts, the American Nazis will come in business suits, is sort of true, just the aesthetic of it. I don't think you're going to see black-shirted, red armband SS troops on American streets. Now they come and they look like ICE.
Well, they used to try to use tiki torches, remember?
The tiki torches, yeah.
Yeah, cosplayers, okay. I think, to a degree.
Good. Cosplaying Nazis. I'm worried about the real ones. But there's, for your viewers, there's a good book that I would recommend. It's by a Canadian author, political consultant lawyer called Warren Kinsella. He's not called Warren Kinsella, that's his name. And he's a prickly guy, but he wrote a book called Web of Hate. And it sort of talked about the Canadian neo-Nazi, like the undercurrent of neo-Nazism within Canada and the dark corners. I read it many years ago, and it radicalized me in a search for the truth and common sense. Sort of popped my eyes open, and that's a good book to start. There are plenty of others that apply to modern society, but like just pick a book and read about not the 40s. I know the History Channel loves the war stuff. Hey, look, Nazis. Read about the late 1920s and the early 1930s, and actually think about how close the United States came to having a fascist, well, it had a fascist movement, but a successful fascist movement in the United States. And perhaps not as close as we are today. In fact, it wasn't. But it wasn't super far off. You had isolationists like Charles Lindbergh. You had anti-Semites mixed in there as well that stemmed back to Henry Ford. You had the German-American Bund. You had demagogues like Father Charles Coughlin, Huey Long. How does the world look if Huey Long isn't shot and killed? I don't know. It might look radically different if he had lived long enough to run against Roosevelt, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so you can imagine different worlds, and that's what sort of science fiction authors will often do, that could have taken a different pathway. And I sometimes think we're in one of them. Like when they turned the Large Hadron Collider on, it's like, wait a second, what happened? We should be living in a nice, happy world where, Hillary Clinton served 2 terms and now younger generation is taking over, and maybe there's wide scale inequity, but they're starting to make a dent into it. Progressives are starting to come up, and we're saying we need to bust these big companies up the way we did 120 years ago in the first progressive era and end the Gilded Age. And that's what needs to happen. These massive international conglomerates need to be broken up. We need to have a better understanding of who owns what. In ufology, again, I always like to come back. We need to have a better understanding of who's backing who. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe you should ask some more questions about Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon. I don't know. Like, it's not my role to do that anymore. I'm out. But to the folks that are still in it, their background matters. What they did matters. Where they came from matters. And what their agenda is, or might be, matters. I haven't heard those questions really being asked in a serious sort of way. And I would encourage people in ufology to do that. Not because they're fascists, but because I think they're taking ufology down the wrong path. And it has nothing to do with the search for the truth, which people like Vallée did for many years, Hynek, even Stan. And I love Stan, but Stan could sometimes go in certain areas. But Stan was always looking for the truth. And his problem was with Roswell and the crash flying saucer thing. Remember, certainty is the enemy of truth. And I think that's when he latched on to certainty. So there's Stan after the 1980s who still had that kernel. I would talk to him privately and you'd hear it, but in his public persona, not so much. And Stan before that, he was a different animal before that, advocating different things like we need to search and do this and do that. More Jim McDonald than Stephen Greer. And, Stephen Greer is Stan. I told Stan before he passed away, I said, you're responsible in some part for Stephen Greer and, Bassett and Rich Dolan. You should have seen the way Stan marked up Rich Dolan's book. And Stan would sit next to Rich at conferences and they'd be very friendly because Rich is a polite, friendly fellow. But the history is terrible. Like Stan would go, that didn't happen. That's not what happened to Jim McDonald. You shouldn't be speculating that McDonald was offed. He killed himself. It was suicide. Like, what are you doing? This isn't history. And I said, well, Stan, have you ever mentioned that to Rich? Have you ever brought that up on a stage with him? No. And, so it's time for people to start bringing that stuff forward too. When you see stuff that is BS, call it out, point it out. And that plays in society as well. That's why what you guys do, not to blow smoke up, is so important. I've watched some of your podcasts and stuff, rational conversations with rational people. And even if you don't agree with them, it's a reasonable conversation, a reasonable platform. That's why I'm here, because I don't do these things anymore. So the only podcast is yours. You asked, happy to do it. And Ryan Sprague, because Ryan Sprague is a reasonable person. But it's a short list. Like, I'm not selling anything anymore. The only thing I'm selling is I wish common sense would return across the board. Because this is terribly, I don't have kids, but I have nephews. I have people younger than me that I know. And the world that I see for them, the historian in me who has watched this happen, it's like Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before. Okay. All of this will happen again. Yeah. And what I see coming is, it's not just frightening, it's terrifying. And that's not the world that I want them to live in. That's not the world that our generation promised them.
And it's not even necessary. Like we live in a world where it's not even necessary. Like we have the tools, we have the wealth to do good things. Yeah. What you were touching on there in terms of just going back in history, I just feel that's so important too. The reason I can, or feel like I can see, I'm not going to say I'm a genius that can see everything. The reason I'm so alarmed by everything that's happening is because I've read the history of the Third Reich. I've read about fascism, the rise of that. And I just encourage people to go back, look at how these movements develop. Not even that, just cults. Look at how cults develop, what the things are. I mentioned that book, How Fascism Worked, the pillars that are involved in that. Just, if you don't agree with us today, all I would ask is that you go back and read about fascism, read about how cults work, and belief systems in general, and just then start applying it to what you're seeing it today. Because, like, for all of us who have actually read on that a bit, it's just truly alarming what's happening at the moment. One other thing,
if the term fascism gets people their dickers in a knot, like Nazis, wait, stop calling them Nazis. Cool, go read a history of the rise of the Bolsheviks. Like, do you want to pick on the communists? Sure, because they used the same tools. You can read about the Rwandan genocide. You can read about the Armenian genocide. You can, any totalitarian, authoritarian movement that eventually led to violence, the history of the Japanese Empire, morphing from a roughly liberal democratic embryonic state to a militaristic state that wasn't fascist, but it was willing to ally with fascists, kind of like a modern Russia, if you will. Not necessarily fascist, but fascist adjacent. And like any of that, you don't have to believe that Trump is a Nazi or any of this stuff. Just pick one, and the patterns are the same. It's just with fascism, it's a useful, convenient tool that I actually think the current American movement and throughout the transnational movement throughout the West is really sort of mirroring. I think that's a good one to start with, but that might be my own bias because I studied it. But you can go look at the communists or all these other things too. It never ends well.
That's a great point too, because like fascism is an overused word. I think it applies in this case personally, based on my own readings, but it does get overused. And so again, you don't need to trust us on fascism. Like Paul said, go look at those other things, look at that history. You're talking before about dehumanization, and that's one of the scariest things for me is the way that's going, the way people talk to other people online, the dialogue that especially Trump uses, but also other Republicans about immigrants. And I wrote, a while back, 2017, I think, about QAnon, and that is just a textbook case of getting people to dehumanize. You just call people pedophiles, call them pedophiles. They're torturing children, they're pedophiles. And all of a sudden you just see all these forums, QAnon forums, where people are actually saying, I want to see televised executions. Not just I want to see them, justice served. There is no justice because it doesn't exist, but they've even moved beyond the justice. They want to see televised executions, and they will pay pay-per-view for televised executions. Once you reach that stage, no matter where you sit politically, if you're a leftist and you're thinking about, I want to watch a televised execution, you have gone to a very dark place, and you need to have a think about where you are.
Yeah. My only counter to that would be being an opponent of capital punishment. I might say a couple of televised executions might change some minds to, like, if you actually saw it, like somebody's horrible, maybe the worst criminal ever, but fine, let him rot in a cell until the end of his or her life.
Would you have done that? Would you have done that with all the Nazis that were tried in Nuremberg?
Made their executions public?
No, let them rot in a cell for the rest of their lives.
Some of them did, or if not for the rest of their lives. Albert Speer, who should have been hanged, but he served 20 years. Baldur von Schirach served 20 years, the leader of the Hitler Youth, and Gauleiter, I think it was Austria. I can name the ones who, and when they had the subsequent trials into the doctors, the ministries and stuff, most of those people were sentenced to jail terms, often pardoned very quickly, some of them going right into the service of the U.S. intelligence or scientific communities too. Now, the concentration camp commanders didn't fare as well. Those ones were generally hanged. But after trials where the evidence was presented and that sort of stuff. But, it's interesting you mentioned that. And Greg, you probably, I sense that maybe we're running too long, but just one thing, because it's UFO related. I used to go to conferences and everybody's like, Werner von Braun, he's like the hero and, everything. And sure, he helped build the American rocket program and the space program. And absolutely. And yet, Nazi, where did you think you were getting your workers from? And the idea that he didn't know is implausible. Was he the worst member of the Nazi regime? No, of course not. Far worse ones. But was he absolutely implicated in it? Yes. The truth washed away because of convenience. Same thing with the intelligence agencies in the 50s, with the Richard Galen network and all that sort of stuff, where they took, and the Soviets did it too, took former SS officers and members of the German intelligence, the Abwehr and German intelligence agencies, and said, hey, you were pretty good. They weren't, but you were pretty good at your job, so we'll get you to work against the Russians or the Americans. Nick Redfern, I don't believe his explanation for Roswell, or I don't accept it, but he wrote a book where he touched upon the body snatchers.
Body snatchers in the desert, yeah.
Yeah, and he was quite right about the Japanese programs, though, and the fact that the Americans, maybe some of that research, and some of those researchers. So, there's a long history of people making compromises too. And that's not a healthy thing. It, again, erodes trust. But we should tell the truth about that stuff. You can say Werner von Braun was absolutely instrumental in the building of the American space program and also employed slave labor to help build and start up the German rocket program to try and win the war for, let's say together, fellas, Nazis. So both of those things can be true at the same time. And it hints at the complicated nature of human beings, too, and what we have to wrestle with in our society today.
Just one thing I did want to touch on before we wound things up. Another of those pillars of fascism that I talked about is appeals to a mythic past. And I know you aren't so much an alternative history person, but we cover that a bit on the Daily Grail kind of thing. I just wanted you to maybe look at that and the dangers of people being interested in Atlantis or those kinds of things through the prism of what the Nazis believed in terms of a few of the Agatha and
Hyperborea.
It's like Hitler had no use for that stuff. It's pretty well accepted that he thought it was crazy, but if I can use it, cool. There were Nazis, and Himmler was one of them, who absolutely not only used it, but believed in it, believed that stuff was real. Hitler did believe in the Aryan race being superior and all that sort of stuff. But I'm pretty sure if you got him sat him down in a room and said, do you believe in Odin and Thor? No. So there's Himmler and some members of his coterie absolutely did. And so, but they were keen on presenting not only alternative presents, which we have talked about, and alternative futures. Things will be nice and rosy once the Reich, the 1,000-year Reich. But changing, what is the history? And the biggest example of that is the stab in the back myth. That Germany was stabbed in the back at the end of the First World War by Jews and socialists and anti-state people. And no, you get your asses kicked. At the end of the day, it was pretty close run for the first 3 years. And then you just ran out of steam. The Americans showed up, and if they'd kept showing up, it would have been worse. And I suppose the mistake the Allies made was the mistake Bush made in the first Gulf War. Yeah, march all the way to Baghdad. The Allies should have marched all the way to Berlin and nip it in the bud there, I guess. But there was no stab in the back. You were beaten. And yet, within 20 years, no, not 20, sorry, within 10 years, the majority of the German people believed in that myth, that they were winning the war and that Jews and communists and socialists had stabbed them in the back. And well, okay, if you start to believe that, then you start to believe that these people are our enemies. The Jews are our enemies. And this alternate history takes root. And now you need an alternate history enemy, Jews and communists and socialists. But by the way, communists are all Jews. That was part of it as well. There's a link there. And you hate them both? Nice. Let's get rid of them both. And it's insidious. And yet you see that in not just America, but in Western society. It's always been present, but this call to the halcyon days, of yore, when the streets were safe and, apple pie and the dollar was strong. And bingo, if you were white. And that is absolutely a race, not tinged. It is a racist way of looking at things, even amongst the majority of the people who are not racist. They just they want to remember happy days and all that kind of stuff. And cool, that's awesome if you were white, probably middle class, maybe not so much, rural poor or whatever. West Virginia and the coal mining towns had a different world than Happy Days presented with the fawns. But they present that mythic past and they say, that's what we're going to give you. That again. We can get there. Just got to get rid of those Mexicans. And anybody with a darker skin could be a problem. The ones that are here, maybe they're okay, but no more. Oh, and by the way, the Confederates, and if you want to talk alternate history, they weren't so bad. They were just all about states' rights, really. It wasn't slavery. I mean, a couple of bad apples, but Robert E. Lee, good man, who owned slaves and fought for slavery. They were traitors. Robert E. Lee might have been a traitor with a sense of honor and dignity on the battlefield. He's a traitor. And so these guys are traitors, and Trump's going around renaming forts like Fort Bragg, Fort Hood. Those are people that could have and should have been hanged for treason.
We are also going to be restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee.
And they weren't, because Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln was assassinated, wanted to, and Lincoln was heading in that direction too. Like, let's all be brothers again. Fine. But let's not forget who these people were. Traitors. Now that we celebrate them as part of this glorious past, when persons of color had to ride at the back of the bus and couldn't use the same water fountain, because that's where it leads. And it also leads inevitably to dehumanization and then to violence. And it is coming in the United States. It's already there, but it is coming. And it will be immigrants, mostly from Mexico and Central America, who are going to be at the beginning of that. But they'll come for you too. It's the Martin Niemöller thing, right? First they came for the Jews. Then they came, and at the end it's like, then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak up for me.
Yeah.
So, my message to the conspiracists who've sidled up to this far right-wing movement and go, yeah, they're telling us what we want to hear. This is great. Guess what? You're the essay in this one. Like, go study German history. If you don't know what that means, you're Ernst Röhm. You're useful idiots now, and they will absolutely sweep you aside. You will have no role in the coming new order, none whatsoever, because they have no respect for you. Zero. But again, they will use you, and then they will use others too. They'll use the Republicans and sweep them aside. The Bushes of the world and all those guys, sweep them aside. The Democrats are easy. You just sweep them aside. But they'll sweep their own aside, because that's not what they want. And history absolutely shows us how that is done. And even within ufology, you can see it done in ufology too. The money grifters will sweep aside anybody. This is really terribly reducing what we were talking about to now ufology and grifting. But small examples, big story. It's like, who gets invited to conferences? It used to be the sensible people, but then a few of the wackos come in, the conspiracists and the disclosure people, and they let them in. And the next thing you know, the sensible people aren't getting invited anymore. Now it's Stephen Greer 1, Stephen Greer 2, Stephen Greer 3. That's what's happening. And that's actually, you can learn something from that too, how that kind of thing corrupts. And then suddenly you're the guy at the end of the Martin Niemöller poem.
You made me think.
Nobody's there.
You made me think. You're talking about, you need to beware people that aggrandize the past and also the future. I'm thinking, there's someone who said something about making America great again. There's a few alarm bells there.
It combines both elements into one catchy slogan.
One catchy slogan, yeah.
You kind of have to give the man the devil his due. He's not smart, but he's very clever, like a weasel, at certain things. And one of them is manipulating and using people. And another one is using propaganda. I doubt he really has read anything about the Nazi regime and how Goebbels and others did it, or any other regime. It's just instinctive to him. And that's because he's a charlatan and he's built his entire career on that. But he's very good at it, and that's a very Make America Great Again is genius, and you should acknowledge that it's genius. And then you should say, we need to combat it with our own form of genius, whatever that is. And
the future,
America has always been great is not the slogan. It doesn't roll off the tongue the same.
And the future promises of the Third Reich pale in comparison to the promises of the techno-oligarchs that are peddling artificial intelligence. They are literally telling us that by 2030, we're going to start conquering the galaxy. Their aim is to conquer the entire universe, to transform all the stars in the cosmos into data centers for virtual humans, trillions and trillions of humans. And to them, the happiness of those humans is as important or even more important as the happiness of all the people living on Earth today. Right, that is what is called long-termism, and that is that is their answer to the psychological trolley problem, to say that letting a few billion people in Africa die of starvation is morally acceptable if you are enabling the development of general artificial intelligence, which will allow us to become these techno gods that will, turn the whole of existence into this virtual paradise. I mean, even Hitler will say, "Whoa."
Have these people never seen the Terminator movies, or WALL-E? WALL-E's just as bad. All the humans just sit around as big blobs, and artificial intelligence and virtual reality zones. It's the same thing, and you lose track of what reality really is. Standing by a stream or feeling a breeze go by and stuff. Instead, you're addicted to
what
this.
life is about. I was talking about that long-termism. I just reviewed More Everything Forever by Adam Becker, a book about the TESCREAL, the long-termists and all that. And that whole idea of the future is just like Miguel said, it's conquering the galaxy so we can turn suns into energy sources and data centers so that we can make more AI, so that we can... And at a certain point, he says, you're forgetting what life is about. You're doing all these things to wreck the environment, to not help people in poverty, when life is just about being with a friend out in nature. And I think that kind of applies a little bit to just the whole fascist movement as well. What future do you want here? Once all the immigrants are deported and this has happened and that has happened that you actually like, what's your life like then? Is your life better with a god king who is going to rule forever and is going to suppress any dissent? And I don't think your life is going to be measurably better, even if you're on your good side kind of thing of the god king.
Yeah, it's like your name, the Red Pill Junkie. Who knew The Matrix is a documentary? The Wachowskis were slightly ahead of their time. And it might not be. And so all of those films, you can learn a lot from fiction too. And science fiction in particular. You guys said I don't do alternative history. I love it. Harry Durmeldove is one of my favorite authors. And, he mixes alternate history with space alien lizards. So it's kind of like it's cool. There you go. But Mac Tony's used to do that, his science fiction writing. Really good science fiction will speculate. The Foundation trilogy, that kind of thing. The Expanse, one of my favorite series. Recently, certainly speculated about what a near future where we're at least traveling throughout the solar system looks like. But you can see Battlestar Galactica did it. The best science fiction is rooted as allegories for our own struggles. Star Trek did it in a more utopian age. And I think people take it far too seriously. Even Star Wars. What is Star Wars except a revolution against a fascist regime? And Lucas was pretty clear about that. Sure, it's space opera and everything, but who's Palpatine? Well, he's Hitler with a space wizard cloak and a sword. But sure, he's Space Hitler. And so that's why Andor is such a brilliant series, because it's not anti-Star Wars. It gets back to the core of what Lucas was talking about without space wizards and laser swords and stuff. But this is a fascist regime, and we're seeing it as the rebellion against it is just starting to really take place. And it's the individuals, the people who can make differences here, there, and it's gritty and grimy, and sometimes there are moral compromises. That's what it is. And you can't just sort of show up and put flowers and guns and stuff and say, hey, give peace a chance. That's great if you're John Lennon. But the real cause, you don't beat fascism. It's never, any of these movements, none of them have ever been beaten without sacrifice. And sadly, often, mostly with violence and war that comes from it. So again, I stress the time to stop it is before it really takes root. And we are at that moment now.
Well, we were 10 years ago, I think, but
yes, but this is the cliff.
yeah,
right.
I think so.
But this is 1934. The fascists are in power, but they're still not completely corrupted the state. And there was an opportunity for the military to stop Hitler. There was an opportunity maybe for Hindenburg to stop Hitler and others, the German conservatives. There were opportunities in 33 and 34 to stop the Nazis, not taken. That's where we are. We're at that place right now.
That might be a good place to wind things up. I know we've gone for a fair while.
Wow, that was an up note. Oh my gosh. Oh, sorry.
No.
I'll just add Zorgrad. Yeah, there you go.
No, I feel like we could go for another hour or two. I just know that we're getting long, and I've always sworn we're not going to be 3-hour Joe Rogan level things because I can never watch them. So we wind this up. Maybe we can come back and touch on this again in a second podcast episode sometime. But I just want to thank you, Paul, for just sharing your insights today. Again, I know we'll get hate in the comments, etc., but I just think that it would be great in the comments if people could just discuss this a little bit, their thoughts. Even if you disagree with this, just discuss it like we said, like rational people, and look at facts. And I think you, especially bringing a little bit of academic learning to that, have explained some of these points already a little bit. So I really want to thank you for that.
No, thank you for inviting me on, both of you. And like I said, it's great to finally talk to you like this, and keep up the good work. Voices like yours within the paranormal community, especially, but in the broader community too. Like my wife sometimes tells me, "Hey, stop posting on Twitter. Hey, stop calling Trump a Nazi or whatever it is that you do." And I go, "You're going to get in trouble. You get doxxed or whatever." And I go, "Listen, I know I'm a very, 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 very teeny little acorn floating on a lake. But if one person reads what some other person writes and goes, I should read that or think about that or do that, cool. I can't change the world. I'm not, some great Luke Skywalker. But that's the lesson of Andor. You don't have to be. What we need are a bunch of Cassian Andors and people like that making a difference. And you guys do, so kudos to you.
I think that's my message as well. I've said to people on Facebook who have posted about, what the moment we're in, say, keep doing that. You might only reach 2 family members, but if you can bring facts, if you can bring some rationalism, bring some humanity to what's going on at the moment, you will make a difference if thousands of other people do exactly the same thing and reach 2 or 3 people. So that's just a perfect summing up. Thanks, Paul.
And also to the people who are interested in this stuff, who may be concerned about the slippery slope to extremism, remember to apply Robert Anton Wilson's maybe logic. Like, take a look at your beliefs, and try to find holes into them. Don't feel that your ideas about UFOs or cryptozoology or ghosts have to become your whole identity, because you are more than your beliefs. You're a person, you're a part of a family, you're a part of a community, and you matter more than your social media and your posts on Twitter or Blue Sky,
Great stuff. Thanks,
Amen.
guys. Hopefully we get another chance to catch up and things aren't as fascist.
Exactly.
See ya.
Peace, guys. Thank you.